St. John's. When Reverend Anna asked if I would be willing to serve during this time of her sabbatical, I pretty quickly said yes, but I also shared with her that I had a couple commitments already on the books during these 3 months. And the first of these commitments is to lead an 8-day Credo conference this coming week. Credo is a program sponsored by the Church Pension Group dedicated to clergy wellness, and I've been on the faculty of Credo for the past decade or so. This means two things. It means I won't be here next week, including next Sunday. I'll return on Monday, a week from this Monday. It also means that I'm going to sneak out after this sermon to drive to Richmond, Virginia, like right after this. I'm going to do a mic drop and leave. So thank you to Reverend Amy for flexing and presiding today so that I can do that. Don't worry about my soul. I received the sacrament at 8 o'clock. I'm okay. And I don't have a stomach bug, so I'm not running to the bathroom. And I was in church a long time yesterday. Let me tell you, I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But it's not because I'm sick of church. It's because I'm going to get on the road, all right? So I'm okay. I'll feel okay. I'm going to preach a sermon, and I'm out of here. I ask that you pray for traveling mercies. A reminder, a serious reminder now, that Easter is not just one sunny Sunday morning. Easter unfolds over 50 days. The church gets 50 days to unpack what the Paschal mystery is all about. And I think even after 50 days, we barely scratch the surface, right? Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. What does that mean for our lives, for the church, for this world? This fourth Sunday of Easter, the sharpest among you already know this. This is Good Shepherd Sunday. How do you know that? Because the collect, the hymns, the readings are mostly about the Good Shepherd. So that's why it's called Good Shepherd Sunday. I have preached dozens of Good Shepherd Sunday sermons over the course of my ordained life, and you would think that today was the perfect opportunity to do so again, especially since in this diocese yesterday we ordained our 10th bishop. And part of that day was about the 9th bishop handing over his crozier, right, his shepherd's staff. The 9th bishop handed it to the 10th bishop. And then, some of you were there with me, and some of you watched online. Then the 9th bishop, Doug Fisher, left his bishop's chair, his cathedra, and he wasn't allowed to sit there anymore. Guess who's going to sit in it today? Our new bishop. Today, right now, is the seating at the cathedral for Bishop Howell, and so she will sit in her chair at the cathedral. It's a time of transition. And I ask that you pray today for Bishop Fisher and his family as they navigate retirement. And I ask that you pray for Bishop Howell and her family as they navigate this new ministry. I think you all know that Reverend Anna played a key role in that discernment process that led to the slate of candidates that brought us to an electing convention where Bishop Howell was elected on the very first ballot by both clergy and laity. A vote of confidence. But the real work starts today, starts now, and it's not just her work, it's our work. It's all of our work as a diocese together. The preacher yesterday was a bishop from Indianapolis, a friend of Bishop Howell's, Jennifer Baskerville Burroughs. And she preached a great sermon, I thought. But here's the highlight that I want to make sure you all know about. She was an undergraduate at Smith. And so she knew something of this diocese. And when she went to Smith, she was not an Episcopalian. And she showed up here during her undergraduate years, her 4 years. And now she's a bishop of the church. And she called you out and said, "You did this." I don't know how many Smith students have been in and out over the last 200 years, and I don't know how many of them are bishops in the church. But I'd like to believe, since I see some of you here today, that one of you is going to be a bishop someday. And I want to say to this congregation, thanks be to God for your witness and ministry and faithfulness that allows people who are looking for something, seeking something, to find it here and be changed for good. Back to Good Shepherd Sunday. I got pretty far in writing an okay Good Shepherd sermon. But I stopped because there's one reading today that we don't usually pay enough attention to, and it's really not about the Good Shepherd, it's not about sheep, but it's important. And if preached on, it's the kind of reading that might lead some people in our culture to say the church ought to stay in its lane and not get too involved in economics or politics. But it's there, y'all, and you said you'd ponder what God is saying to the church from this reading, and we all said thanks be to God for it. Right? So Wendy did that reading, and that's what I'm going to preach on. And then I'm going to drop my mic, and then I'm going to run. And so, if you have any comments or reflections or feedback on the sermon today, take some notes, and we'll talk about it in 2 weeks. But I'll be gone. I'll be on my way to Richmond. But I want to read it one more time. Those who had been baptized devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of the bread and to the prayers. And awe came upon everyone, because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. And all who believed were together, and they had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread. And they broke bread at home, and they ate their food with glad and generous hearts. They praised God, having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. First Church Jerusalem is the focal point of the Acts of the Apostles. It's a sequel, as you may know, produced by the same folks that brought us the Gospel of Luke. Luke's Gospel is about what Jesus did to bring peace on earth and goodwill to all. Luke's Gospel is the one with the shepherds and the birth narrative. And Luke's Gospel is the one that gives us the story of the so-called prodigal and the story of the so-called Good Samaritan. And it's Luke that gives us the Sermon on the Mount. But after all that, Luke says, there's more. And the sequel to Luke's Gospel is the Acts of the Apostles, and we see that the 11, and especially Peter, have found their voices again because Jesus is not dead. Jesus is risen. Jesus is alive. And Peter, who was a broken man after saying, I do not know the man, I do not know the man, I do not know the man, is now telling anybody that will listen to him, I know the man. And let me tell you what I said to him at Caesarea Philippi. He's the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I'll tell everybody now, because my life has been changed by Easter. And it's now the church's job to help bring peace on earth and goodwill to all. We don't just wait for Jesus, we do the work that has been given to us to do. That's what Acts is about. That early community of followers of Jesus in Jerusalem began to model a different way to live in the midst of a dying Roman Empire. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, and they took the bread and they blessed it, and they broke it, and they shared it, just as we will do. And they said their prayers, just as we do. And their lives were changed for good. It's important to notice that they didn't read Karl Marx. Not that there's anything wrong with reading Karl Marx. I recommend it. But that's not what changed their lives. That's not what changed their relationships with their stuff. It was their baptism. And it was their commitment to respect the dignity of every human person. That's what transformed them. It was a commitment to strive for justice in a world where injustice was rampant. It was their commitment in a world of haves and have-nots to share. And so they prayed and they gathered and they opened their hearts to God and to one another, and they shared their stuff. And they didn't feel remorse for that. They felt glad and generous hearts because of that. They found community because of that. They loved God. They loved their neighbor, one day at a time. And I suspect they were not that different from us. I suspect they were taught, as many of us were, to have a scarcity mentality. There are a lot of difference between the Roman Empire in the first century and the United States in the 21st century, but there's also some common ground and some similarities. I think there's something deep within the human condition that wonders, is it really true that whoever has the most toys when we die wins? That is not the gospel we proclaim. But I think there is something deep down in all of us that thinks what we have is ours, mine, and others better keep their hands off my stuff. And that is not the way of the cross. And that is not the way of love. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, St. John's. I have only been with you a short time, but I know how this community is a modern-day extension of the Acts community. I know how you care for the unhoused and bring out cots for them to sleep on. And I see manna in the time that I'm with you. You know, it's so tempting to pray for those who do not have a bed and those who do not have a meal and say, oh, we're praying for you. We need to do more than pray. And you do. You do. It's holy work. And I think those who participate in that work, I've heard it all through my ministry, we may do some good, but it's we who are changed even more when we do that work, because we see in the face of our guest a beloved child of God, a neighbor, a friend. So our hearts get changed. Perhaps you have heard the famous words spoken by a 20th century Brazilian archbishop, Dom Helder Câmara. You may not know his name and you may not know his ministry, but I bet you've heard these words before. When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. When we feed the poor, always it leads us to questions about what is fair and what is just and how we got to this place, and to questions about what needs to change and how we are called to be a part of that change. And it may lead us to ask what we need and what's the difference between what we need and what we want, and what can we share. For many years, especially around stewardship time, I preached and talked about abundance. It's a very biblical word. It's a word Walter Brueggemann loved, how God's world is abundant and we need not live with a scarcity model. It's a word I used for a long time, but in recent years I am adapting my thinking a bit, because I have been persuaded that abundance can also be a word of the privileged. And not everybody has abundance. The word that I have substituted, because I was persuaded by a retired bishop, is that we need to talk about enoughness. That those of us who especially are privileged need to say, when is it enough? What's enough? How much do I need? And that too is a biblical word, my friends. The lessons that God's people learned in the wilderness of Sinai and that Jesus taught us to pray every week is about daily bread, daily manna. Right? If the manna comes down from heaven and we all get enough for today, but I decide I want to hoard 6 days' worth, then 5 of my friends are hungry. It doesn't work that way. The economics, the politics of the Sinai desert is about 1 day's bread. And it's what Jesus teaches us to pray for. Enough. Enough for today. I invite you, since I won't be at the door today, but I'll see you in 2 weeks, to pray and to think about how this reading from Acts calls to you. How it might be changing your life. and what it might mean for you and for this congregation and for how you live in the world. And to not be afraid to ask why questions about poverty in this country. That is our lane. Fairness and justice is our lane. And the baptismal covenant expects us to do that, and there is good reason for you to keep renewing it every week of this Easter season. And trust me, if you take this seriously, you'll get called a communist. It's okay. Because we are in good company with these folks in Acts 2. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship and to the prayers and to the breaking of the bread at a table where everybody was welcome. Everyone. And these are our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents in the faith. And it may not be exactly prescriptive of how we behave in our time and place, but it is certainly descriptive of the values we need that we share with them. And they have much to teach us about what it means to claim Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is the Good Shepherd, that Jesus is the one who calls us to love God and to love our neighbor, no exceptions, with all of our heart. Amen.